Hello everyone! I would like to show you a really easy way to make faux turquoise with polymer clay. You only need 2 ingredients, some teal pearl Sculpey, and crayons. These are really cheap crayons that I got at the dollar store. You don't need Crayola or any kind of fancy crayons. Most of it's going to melt away anyway in the oven. But there's really only a few steps to be able to do this. It's super simple. I really wasn't happy with the results that I was getting using other tutorials I had seen, so I did a little bit of experimentation and just came up with my own method. So the first thing you need to do is to get some wax shavings going. And depending on the look you're going for, if you want a darker one, use more black. If you want a more earthy looking one, go ahead and use more brown. I'm just going to use equal amounts of both. But get a very sharp blade and just start shaving off little bits of wax from the crayon. And you want them to be relatively small. And be careful when you're doing this because the blade can slip and you can cut yourself. But you don't need too much of it, so a little bit more black. And then we'll do a little brown. And again, you don't want any big chunks, so if they kind of show up when you're shaving it off, just pick them out of your pile. And this can get really messy, so I do it on a piece of wax paper just to kind of keep the mess to a minimum. Oh, and there's another big chunk. But if you don't care, you can do it right on your table. And just kind of pile up the wax, shavings, and mix them together so there's an even amount of black and brown spread out throughout the pile. As you can see, my hands are now covered with wax. It doesn't really matter, but I like to wipe it off. Then go ahead and take a piece of the Sculpey that's probably going to be the same size, whatever you would need for the bead or for the mold that you're using for a cabochon or whatever it is that you're making. Make sure it's conditioned first. And then pretty much all you need to do is dip it in the wax and kind of push the wax in to the clay a little bit. So you can pick up little spots. I like to have a mixture of the big areas and the little ones, so I kind of smush it around like that. If you wanted to make, say, a crack in your piece, you can just sort of spread it out a little bit and then take some wax and sprinkle it in that little area, push it down in, and then push the clay back together. And when the wax melts, it'll leave that shape kind of as a dent in the faux turquoise. Like, I probably have a bit too much wax on this one, so I'm going to scrape a little bit of it off. But you want to make sure that wax is really smushed in there. Now all you have to do is either shape your bead, or if you're using a mold, definitely use some baby powder or cornstarch in the mold because this will stick. I don't recommend baking it in the mold, like if you have one of those bake-in molds from Sculpey, because the wax won't leave the dent. It'll just kind of spread around on the top and it won't look the way that you want it to. But I tend to bake my pieces at the correct temperature for the clay, so for Sculpey it's 275, but I bake it for a lot longer. For my cabochons, because they're pretty thick, I'll bake them at about 45 minutes to an hour. And I know at that time, the wax will go ahead and melt. So, you know, if you want to bake it for less time, the wax may not melt as much. It may not leave as deep of an indentation. Anyway, once you take the piece out of the oven, you want to take a baby wipe and kind of wipe off any of the excess wax that might be melted around the dents. There also may be little flecks of white, and you want to take the baby wipe and kind of clean those up a bit too, just depending on the crayons that you use. Like I said, I use cheap dollar store crayons, so sometimes there's a little white left just because they're cheap. If you use a more expensive crayon like a Crayola, you may not have that issue, but you still want to clean it with a baby wipe when you're done. But this is what you should end up with. This one I've gone ahead and baked and then sanded all the way up to 1000 grit sandpaper. Then I applied Varathane to it to give it that really glossy coating. And I don't know if the camera's picking up on it or not, but you can see that it has a bit of a shimmer to it, and that's because we use the teal pearl. There is a turquoise colored Sculpey. I don't like it as much for this because it's really blue, and I like my turquoise to be a little bit more green in color, like this is. But you can see here, the wax has left dents in the turquoise. It kind of looks a bit more organic than the other ones that I've seen online. So hopefully it's picking that up on the camera, but I really like how it turned out, and it's super simple. And you don't just have to use this technique to make turquoise. Here's an example of a cabochon that I made using fuchsia clay mixed with translucent clay, and I added orange glitter to it, which I don't know if you can see, and then I used purple wax instead of the black and brown. And I chose to leave some of the white marking just because I thought it looked kind of neat in this particular case. So there's an example of something kind of more funky you could do with it. I've also made one that looks like marble using white clay and then making really fine lines and smushing the wax into the lines. So it kind of came out looking more like a stone. And here's an example of one of the pieces that I've made using the faux turquoise. This is a really big pendant on a bracelet. The pattern is called Lita, and I got it from the Matubo bead website. And I just wanted to show you what it would look like when you actually use the faux stone in a piece of jewelry that's maybe not just polymer clay. So you can see on this one, it's a little bit different than the other one that I showed you. There's a bit more brown in this one, and the spots vary from very big, like right here, and then I have little tiny flecks throughout. So there's an example of how you could use it. So go ahead and experiment, have fun, and have a good day.